Good morning, everyone. My name's Emma Foman. I'm the new-ish CEO of ABNY. Thank you. I didn't pay all of you to say that. I started at the beginning of the summer, and what a summer it has been. So we certainly aim to make timely programming here at ABNY, and you can't really get more timely than this. So I really appreciate everyone coming today, including Rich and Alec and the team from the New York City Charter Revision Commission. And I want to first give a thank you to my alma mater, Fordham, for hosting us. And, it's been, as I said, a really exciting few months. We've had some closed-door conversations with the mayoral candidates, of which there are many. We've also had our summer meetup with our young professionals just a few weeks ago. We also had ABNY's first ever film screening of Drop Dead City, which was a very hot ticket, and plan to do some more programming along those lines as well, including some convenings with the mayoral candidates later this fall. So as many of you know, ABNY was formed in the 1970s in a really challenging moment in New York City's history. And what I love about ABNY is it really proved that when we come together as a city, we can tackle some of New York City's biggest challenges. And that's exactly what I hope to build on here at the helm of ABNY. We have about 250 member organizations that really represent New York City's civic fabric across the corporate sphere, higher ed, nonprofit, labor, culturals, healthcare, and civic sectors, many of whom are here today. We'll be taking a real priority of strengthening this civic fabric, and I hope to take an approach that's really a whole of society approach. And that's going to manifest in a few ways. One is leading convenings like today's to advance, to connect, educate, and debate. You can't, like I said, make them really more timely than today's conversation. Building coalitions to advance policies that matter to New Yorkers and to our members. Of course, strengthening the next generation of civic talent through our ABNY Women's and Young Professionals programming, and investing in communities throughout the 5 boroughs through our ABNY Foundation. And now, while I'm here, I would be remiss if I didn't mention and give a plug for our Spirit of ABNY Awards, which are next Tuesday, September 16th, at the Rainbow Room. We'll be honoring Maria Torres Springer, former First Deputy Mayor, Kathy Wild, and Police Commissioner Jesse Tisch. We still have tickets available, so please join us. And now to turn to today's conversation. So as New York City voters prepare for the wildly exciting election this November, most of the focus has really been around the spirited mayoral candidates. But beyond that consequential decision, voters will also find a number of other important questions on the ballot. These questions are the result of a unique process known as the Charter Revision Commission, where voters are asked to help shape the single most important document governing New York City, the New York City Charter. The Charter has dictated foundational aspects of how our government is structured and how it operates, and over time, adjusting to changing needs of the city, the Charter has been amended to create new tools, many of which we know today. Community boards, ULURP, ranked choice voting, and others. In short, some admittedly arcane and wonky aspects of our city government, but important pieces that really have real-world impacts. And it is in that framing that we hold today's important conversation and review the 5 proposed changes that will be on the ballot this November. These changes are the outcome of a process that started last December, led by Alec, Rich, and the Charter Revision Commission. I'm extremely excited to have this conversation and extremely excited to welcome some of the other members of the Charter Revision here today. So before we get started, I just want to introduce our speakers. Joining us, raised in East New York, Brooklyn, Rich Buery currently serves as the CEO of Robin Hood, one of the nation's leading anti-poverty organizations. Before joining Robin Hood, he served as New York City Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, where he was a key architect of Pre-K for All. Earlier in his career, he founded Groundwork to support the educational aspirations of public housing residents in Brooklyn, and co-founded the organization iMentor. In short, he is one of the most well-respected and accomplished social service leaders in New York City today. Also joining us is Charter Revision Commission's Executive Director Alex Schrierenbeck. Before joining the commission, Alex previously served as General Counsel and Senior Advisor for Planning to former First Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer. While at City Hall, he was instrumental in the passage of City of Yes to promote housing opportunity, carbon neutrality, and economic growth. And prior to the mayor's office, Alex worked as a litigator and served as a law clerk on the U.S. Supreme Court to Justice Stephen Breyer. Please join me in welcoming Rich and Alex to the stage. We're gonna.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Emma, and the entire ABNY team for having us to talk about the Commission's work. As you heard, over the course of the year, the Commission took on the task of reviewing the New York City Charter to find ways to make our government more transparent and more responsive, with a particular focus on the city's housing crisis. As most of you know, in July, we voted to recommend 5 initiatives to voters, 4 on housing and land use, and 1 on elections. The proposals were informed by 7 months of public input and careful study, and were driven by the voices of thousands of New Yorkers, from experts and advocates to neighbors and concerned citizens. We held 10 public hearings, 2 in each borough, with over 30 hours of live testimony from New Yorkers. 800 New Yorkers came to the hearings in person, thousands more submitted comments online, and the testimony we received touched on virtually every aspect of life in the city. The proposals that we are forwarding to the voters emerged from that testimony. Indeed, every one of the proposals was rooted in and shaped by testimony we heard at the Commission. So in April, we put out a preliminary report documenting the problems that were most of interest to the Commission and pointing the way to potential solutions. After successive rounds of feedback, we produced an interim report and then a final report with the specific proposed charter amendments and ultimately the 5 ballot proposals that we expect to be on the ballot in November. This would not have been possible without an extraordinary team. I was really lucky to serve alongside a truly distinguished group of New Yorkers with deep expertise. Sharon Greenberger, CEO of the YMCA, was my vice chair. We had leaders from every sector, from business and nonprofits to former city planning commissioners like Carl Weisbrod, who I see in the office, and affordable housing champions. It's a group that really understands government, how to work with government, how to work in government, but also understands the ways in which government does not always work. We were also supported by an incredible staff led by Alex, who really did the work of presenting ideas for us to wrestle with and ultimately to consider and approve. So while we looked at issues ranging from nonprofit contracting to police oversight to elections, our central charge was tackling the city's housing crisis. Lifelong New Yorkers told us that they've been pushed out of the neighborhoods they grew up in. They told us about having to crowd together in apartments that are far too small for their families. They told us how one small setback can put working families on the edge of eviction and into shelter. They told us about the struggles that young New Yorkers face to plant roots in the city or to return here after college. And they told us about how often they say goodbye to friends and family moving out of the city in pursuit of housing that they cannot afford. Every New Yorker understands that the rent is too damn high. You still get to laugh at that line a decade later, all right? Today, over 50% of New Yorkers are rent burdened, meaning that they spend over 30% of their income on rent. The numbers are not surprisingly significantly higher for low-income New Yorkers. Why does it seem impossible to get a foothold in the city? Why do housing prices continue to go up and up? At the root of New York City's housing crisis is a shortage of housing. Simply put, we don't have enough housing to keep up with demand. Since 1960, New York City has been in a declared housing emergency, which is defined as when the vacancy rate is below 5%. Today, the net rental vacancy rent is 1.4%, lower than at almost any time since the emergency was first declared. So how do we fix this? How do we ensure that New York City remains the cradle of opportunity that it was for my parents when they immigrated to New York from Panama 60 years ago? There is no simple answer to this question. We know that rent subsidies are critical. We know that legal protections for renters are critical. We know that expanding wages is critical. Combating racial discrimination is foundational. But any response has to have at its center a central and critical fact. We need to build more housing. And we need to build it everywhere, not just in a handful of neighborhoods. When we don't have enough housing, New Yorkers outbid each other for the few homes that are available, and prices continue to climb. But it does not have to be that way. Our own history shows us that we can produce more housing. In the 50s and 60s, we produced twice as many housing as we do today, and housing was more affordable as a result. And while there are many reasons why you're not building enough housing, the primary reason is simple. In much of the city, we have made it too expensive, too difficult, or sometimes too illegal to build the housing that we need. And even when we do produce housing, we don't do it everywhere. While some neighborhoods have seen transformative levels of housing production, many see no housing growth or have actually lost housing in certain years. From 2014 to 2024, 12 community districts add as much housing as the other 47 combined. The same is true for affordable housing specifically. In the last 3 years, the top city council districts added an average of 751 new affordable homes each year. The bottom council districts added just 3. Not 300, but 3. The consequences for our city run deep. It stops us from being the place we aspire to be. Uneven housing production is one of the reasons why New York City remains, and our metropolitan area remains, one of the most segregated in the country. It's one of the reasons why hundreds of thousands of black families have left the city over the past decades. It impacts our economy and our culture as employers struggle to retain talent, and as the artists and creatives that make life here so wonderful struggle to make ends meet here. And it limits our political power in a time when we cannot afford to have our political power reduced. In 2020, we lost a House seat by fewer than 100 residents. We lost power in Washington over what's essentially a mid-sized apartment building. Now, we know that the charter can't solve all of our problems. Policies like rent stabilization, property taxes, public subsidies are all important, but they do not live within the charter. But there is much that we can do within the bounds of the New York City Charter. Questions 2 through 5 would knock down many of the barriers that stand in the way of developing the housing New Yorkers say they want most: affordable housing and smaller projects that really fit the culture of the neighborhoods. These are exactly the projects that suffer the most under the status quo. Critically, they would maintain local voice in land use decisions, and ULURP would continue to be the primary vehicle for land use changes. But we've learned a lot from 50 years of ULURP. We've learned that we can keep ULURP how it's working, where it's working well, but we've also learned that we can fix it where it is not. So the Commission heard that it is too costly, time-consuming, and unpredictable to build new affordable housing. Small developers, including MWBEs, told us of crushing financial setbacks when politics stalled or derailed projects. And even the city faces charter-driven obstacles when it wants to use public land and public funds to build affordable housing. The first proposal would create a new fast-track zoning action for publicly financed affordable housing projects at the Board of Standards and Appeals. Under the proposed process, these projects could be approved in less time than it takes to even begin public review today. The amendment would also create a fast track for projects that deliver housing in the parts of the city that build the fewest affordable housing units. As the Commission heard, political dynamics in many parts of the city make it all but impossible to approve affordable housing. Developers told us that the first thing they do when looking at a possible project is to look at the location and to look at who the local elected officials are. And if the local political leadership is hostile to development, they don't even begin the process of exploring. In the 12 community districts that permitted the least affordable housing, applications that would deliver affordable housing would have access to a fast track. In the rest of the city, nothing would change. The fast track would preserve community reward review simultaneously with the borough president review, and then the city planning commission would have 30 days to make a final vote. From start to finish, the process would cut the time for review in half. The next proposal would create a new process called ELRP, Expedited Land Use Reform Review Process. As we know, ULURP is basically a one-size-fits-all process, subjecting both big and small changes to the same process for public review. In many cases, that expanded review is fully appropriate. But it also means that that one-size-fits-all approach means that many modest changes or projects that could unlock affordable housing on public lands or small changes in the streetscape that could protect flood-prone communities are forced into the same lengthy process in a way that just makes no sense. Right now, a 10-unit apartment building might have to go through the same review as Hudson Yards. As a result, many developers won't even propose housing projects that would modestly expand housing. In fact, in the last 10 years, there wasn't a single application to increase residential density by less than 30%. Yet these are exactly the type of projects that most neighbors would actually welcome. Small-scale, contextual development that adds homes without transforming neighborhoods. This amendment would create a shorter, simpler, and more predictable process for these modest housing proposals, as well as climate projects like resiliency upgrades or adding solar panels to public land. Again, it would allow 60 days for community board and borough president review, followed by 30 days at the City Planning Commission. The next proposal would create an affordable housing review board. The commission proposes to eliminate ULURP's mayoral veto and council override for affordable housing projects and replace it with a new affordable housing appeals board consisting of the borough president of the affected borough, the speaker of the city council, and the mayor or the representatives. Across months of testimony, perhaps the leading complaint we heard is that ULURP gives too little attention to borough-wide or city-wide needs. Today, a single council member can effectively veto affordable housing within their district, even though their borough and their city desperately need it. City-wide needs are too often trumped by local NIMBY interests, reflected in an individual council member's vote. The Affordable Housing Appeals Board would have the power to reverse city council decisions on land use applications, but only if they would create affordable housing, and only if 2 of the 3 democratically elected officials chose to do so. Otherwise, ULURP remained the same. The final proposal is one that would modernize the city map by centralizing and digitizing it. The city map establishes the legally defined locations of streets, their names and their grades, as well as the locations of mapped parkland and other public places. Today, that map consists of 5 different sets of maps, 1 for each borough, over 8,000 individual pages. It's a highly inefficient system that could add months or even years to infrastructure and other projects. Our amendment would bring the city map into the 21st century by creating a single digital map. Finally, we propose moving the city's primary and general elections to even-numbered years, so city elections are held the same year as presidential elections. We know that voter turnout in city elections is just abysmal. In 2021, just 23% of registered voters participated in the general election, even though every local elected official, including the mayor, was on the ballot. 2022's rate was over 60%, nearly 3 times as many voices heard. I think that shifting elections from odd-numbered years to even years is perhaps the simplest and most effective way to increase voter turnout. Cities across the country have made this change successfully, and they've seen immediate improvements in voter participation, including electorates that are more demographically representative of their bodies. We also think that the change would save an estimated $42 million every 2 years. We know that increasing voter turnout gets at the root of so many other challenges we face as a city, and I'm truly grateful for the New Yorkers who put this issue on the commission agenda. It was not on the agenda when we started, but it really reflected what we heard during our sessions. So these 5 proposals together represent more than technical fixes to our city charter. They're about who we are as a city and who we aspire to be as a city. When we make it easier for New Yorkers to afford a home, we're not just addressing a housing crisis. We're keeping families together. We're preserving communities that give our city their souls. And we're ensuring that the next generation of dreamers can find their futures here. When we make it easier for New Yorkers to vote, we're not just improving turnout statistics. We're amplifying the voices of working families who deserve a say in their city's future. We're strengthening our democracy, and we're building a government that more aptly reflects the diversity of our city. So it's our moment to choose. Will we be a city that watches its children leave, or that builds for them to stay? As a parent of a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old who doesn't want to leave the city but will follow my kids everywhere, this is a permanent and an urgent issue. Because I also need them to leave my apartment. Will we be a city where only some voices matter, or one where every New Yorker has a seat at the table? So I appreciate you being here, appreciate your interest, and looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
So we're going to start with a few questions from me, and then I'll turn it over to folks in the audience who I'm sure have some burning questions as well. So, to kick us off, that was a really helpful overview of the 5 proposals. I think that there's finally consensus in New York that we're facing an affordable housing crisis. Talk to us about what the scale of these commitments would look like. Building certainly on City of Yes and all of the affordable housing improvements or benefits that came from that. What does this really move the needle, these 5 commitments?
Well, that's the hypothesis, right? That's what we'll find out. I spent the better part of the last 2 years working on City of Yes. And City of Yes was our attempt to do the most to move the needle on the housing crisis within the 4 corners of the structure we have. And the Charter Revision Commission is similar, and it asks, can we further those same goals by changing the structure? And an underlying hypothesis of this commission is that we are seeing much less housing proposed or approved because of the process we have built up to propose and approve housing. And that was borne out by months of inquiry and testimony before the commission. In fact, I think we believe that the most important consequence of the the charter we have today, is that many, many applications that would deliver affordable housing in communities across the city are never, ever proposed. There are whole parts of the city where there hasn't been a single application to add housing in the last 10 years, not one even entering public review. And we found that the most common way for a application that enters public review to be extinguished is through a withdrawal without even a public vote, quietly in a back room after an applicant is told they cannot move forward. And so we think that if you bring this process out into the light, and if you have this process play out according to more neutral rules that reinforce borough-wide and citywide priorities, that you will see more housing. Because when you poll New Yorkers over and over again, they have an overwhelming desire to see more housing, and they agree that we ought to see more housing. And so the underlying theory of this Charter Revision Commission, maybe it's a crazy idea, I guess we'll find out, is that if you ask New Yorkers themselves whether they want to see change, they might go for it.
That's great. I feel like one of the main tensions in this conversation, specifically today, and we'll get to the Board of Elections vote this afternoon, is the Charter Revision Commission balancing the need for speed in building affordable housing and preserving the community engagement component of ULURP. How did you think through that as part of the process, and how do we strike that balance?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I think we all agree, I certainly agree, that it is important that community residents have a meaningful say in the future of their communities. And as someone who grew up in a neighborhood that often suffered from a lack of consideration when it comes to everything from environmental justice to the quality of our schools, I believe very importantly, that local residents, that neighbors have a say in the future of their districts. But I would also say that voice is not only about the people who live there now, it also has to reflect the people who would live there and choose to live in those neighborhoods as our city grows. So I don't think it's a question of choosing between local voice and having a broader perspective that takes into account the interests of our broader city and the needs of future residents. I believe you can have a process that balances both of those things, and I think what we really tried to do was develop a reasonable process that reflected both types of perspectives. I don't know that it's perfect, but I think it's a damn good effort. What I do know is that the current process certainly did not strike the appropriate balance. And it can't be right that we can have a system where, despite the clear, critical, overwhelming need for more housing, despite the clear public consensus, which we see in every poll, which we see in our current election, that people want more housing. It can't be that the process that allows a single council member to overrule all those other interests can't be the right balance either. Some of the testimony that I heard that was particularly compelling was the pressure that so many council members have faced when it comes to trying to do the right thing by development, but the overwhelming pressure they get from neighbors who don't want the housing developed. And it's the nature of all these decisions. It's hard to organize the voices of the people who theoretically would live there versus those who have benefited from the status quo. And therefore, those voices can be so overwhelming that even city council members do not always feel empowered to do what they know their neighborhood, their borough, and their city needs. So I fully agree, and we were clear that the role of community boards are sacrosanct in this process. No reduction in review, but we're just trying to balance that against a broader perspective. I really do think this proposal does that. The other thing I will say, I think it relates to the first question as well about what we think is going to happen. It's not necessarily directly about housing production, but it is about economic development. Because the other thing that we saw happening, Alex talked about the proposals that don't get put forward. The other thing that we heard from so many developers, smaller developers, minority-owned developers, women-owned developers, is the intense financial pressure it creates when you have a process that is unpredictable. Where you can be called on to do research and plans that have nothing to do with your project and then be told later that despite all the money you've invested, the loans you've taken out, it's still a no. We're also harming Black businesses, we're harming women-owned businesses by not having a process that is more predictable, that is more reliable, that again allows people to make decisions based on a broader set of needs as opposed to the parochial needs of a local community. Like Alex said before, we don't know what works until we do it. I certainly don't think that anything in these proposals is a silver bullet. It's not like the world changes overnight with these proposals, but I think everywhere that we can remove unhelpful process, and I don't mean process, I mean process of bureaucracy gets the bad rap. Bureaucracy plays an important role in making thoughtful, inclusive decisions and making sure people have a voice in how they are governed. We just want the right process. We want the right size process. We want fair process. I do think these proposals strike a better balance.
If I could add one thing to that, I should have included in my own remarks, is our own history tells us that if you make it legal to build modest multifamily, it will get built, right? That was the enduring lesson of the first half of the 20th century, that throughout the city there was delivered the archetypal 5- and 6-story apartment building that remains the sort of workhorse of affordability and defines many of our outer borough neighborhoods. In 1961, in one fell swoop, we made that illegal in much of the city and replaced it with rules that permitted only 1- and 2-family homes, and so that's what we got. There was a period in the parts of the city where we had not prohibited modest multifamily construction in the early 2000s, where surging development pressures, because New York City seemed to be a place where everybody wanted to live again, led to a steady clip of that kind of modest multifamily construction. And the city's response was 100 rezonings in the Bloomberg administration, the vast majority of which were downzonings, the vast majority of which were intended to limit that kind of modest multifamily construction. That is the lowest cost to build. It is the most naturally affordable. I think about my own neighborhood of Park Slope, where I grew up, and today there are tons of immigrant contractors who probably 25 years ago in Kensington would have been building modest multifamily housing. Today, you know what they do? They help renovate brownstones, take them from multifamily to single family, improve the facade, do multi-million-dollar renovations. That whole network of immigrant small business contractors could be unleashed to build more naturally affordable, modest multifamily throughout the city, as they did through New York City's history. And so our hypothesis was tested for much of New York City's history, and we could try it again.
Love that. So what would you say to city council members, the speaker included, who criticized these proposals for limiting the one tool that they have to extract the pound of flesh from developers as part of the ULURP process, or take away their negotiating power to get the best benefits for their communities?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Speaker Adams, and who has been better on this issue than any speaker in memory, period. I mean, she championed City of Yes and got it through the council, and so her record on trying to help address our housing crisis is really not questionable. It is unfortunate that, you know, larger, I think, political dynamics are making this into football when it shouldn't be. I would say that the proposals that the commission have put forward were really surgically targeted to address what's not working in ULURP while leaving whole what is working. And so let's take, for example, the proposal to fast track projects that deliver affordable housing in the 12 community districts that build the least. If you are on the list of the 12 community districts that build the least affordable housing, it is because you are building virtually nothing, zero, zilch. And when I say that, I am not being hyperbolic. You can look at the data from the New York Housing Conference or others about the parts of the city that are building the least housing. It is because they're building zero. And so the idea that a political process that delivers nothing in those neighborhoods is sort of authentically delivering what New York City voters want to see, I think is hard to stomach. And so that proposal would leave whole and untouched review in the 4/5 of the city that are doing more of their part, right? Then take our modest housing proposal. Why is it that under the ELURP proposal, Rich suggested, proposals that add up to 30% more housing, but no more, are eligible for ELURP? It is because in the last 10 years, there wasn't a single application in ULURP to add 30% or less. So that's not taking anything out of ULURP that is in it today. That's creating a new avenue of public review for what today public review doesn't deliver. And then finally, the Affordable Housing Appeals Board is in many ways, I think, the part that is giving some council members most trouble. They're accustomed to having, being the only voice in the room when an affordable housing project is decided. I think that many members use that power very well and to the benefit of their communities. Not all do. And a structural change is about saying, what if we have a couple more voices in that room? A borough president who has both a strong connection to community boards and a borough-wide perspective. Borough presidents came to us and said they know how to do land use and they do a good job. And many of them, as former council members, said that the system that they had in the council doesn't work too well, and now they see that it should be changed. And so, yeah, that is a change, but only if a borough president and a mayor or a speaker and a borough president agree is there really any fundamental change in the dynamics of an affordable housing project? And it would only apply to projects that deliver affordable housing. So I would say all of these are targeted interventions, not to go at the heart of council authority, but to address where ULURP today is broken.
Thank you, Alec. The only thing I would add, really focusing on the first part of what you said, is that one of the things that we really did is we were truly inspired by the Council's Fair Housing Framework, and really thinking about what are the ways that the charter could allow real teeth to a process that ensure that everyone does their fair share of housing. And so again, just reiterating, particularly the proposal that would create the fast track for those 12 districts that produce the fewest relative units of affordable housing. Again, it's really trying to drive incentive to push development where it doesn't exist. And one way you can do to make sure that you're not on that list as a council member is to approve more housing districts in your community. And then you then go back to the traditional ULURP process.
Can we spend another moment on the history of member deference? Like, how did we get to this point where things are being killed, projects may never even appear? Would love to know a little bit of that background and a little bit of that history.
Well, I'll just say one thing, and Alex knows the history better, but I think it's important to understand that this is not a intentional design of the system. It was a fear that was raised as a reason not to have our current process. And unfortunately, those fears were realized. But it's not like we intended to design a system that allows a council member to effectively veto any development in their district. Council member deference did not appear in the law. It's not something that is part of it is a design flaw, not a core design element. So I think it's important to start the conversation there. We're not changing something that was designed to be. We are reflecting on history, reflecting on the voices that were worried about this, and saying they were right, and now trying to fix a problem that should never have been there in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I would just add, so ULURP is approved by voters in 1975. And if you go back and look at the charter proposals that, the charter process that cooked up those proposals, it was table stakes that having a hyper-local veto would be a bad idea. And that's not what ULURP was intended to deliver. It was intended to synthesize advisory local views and the views of boroughs, and then the views of experts and appointed people, and then the views of democratically accountable elected officials, culminating in the Board of Estimate, which we know went the way of the dodo in 1989. So the process that voters approved did not have this function. In 1989, when the Board of Estimate was gotten rid of and the City Council took its place, as Rich outlined, the fear of the architects of the 1989 Charter Revision Commission is that we would get a system like member deference. Ed Koch has a very prescient letter that he wrote to the chair of that Charter Revision Commission, and he said, and I can't believe he called it this well, he said, "I fear your proposal will give legitimacy to the not in my backyard mentality that threatens land use paralysis."
Incredible.
Yeah, not bad. And what's interesting is it didn't immediately come to pass. The Charter Commission chair and the staff actually made a deal with then Speaker Peter Vallone. And Peter Vallone agreed that he would not run his conference that way. And the speaker used to have more powers over members. And so that was not the dynamic through the 90s. And then it started to creep up in the 2000s as the power of the speaker weakened. And I think also because general attitudes toward development changed as sort of New York went from being a place where was on sort of like economic life support, right? I mean, think about the early 90s in the city, into the mid 2000s where there was just so much fear and real displacement and gentrification and growth. And so now it's an iron law. It's been 16 years since a housing proposal was approved through the council over the objection of the local member.
Other thoughts on that question?
No.
All right, I want to shift gears to the electoral proposals, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I'm fascinated by how it went down with open primaries. I know there was a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, ultimately was excluded because of lack of consensus. Would love to know a little bit more about those core issues and core concerns that led you to defer that reform.
Yeah, just as you described, this again was not something that was on the commission's agenda when we started, but it was a topic on which we heard the most testimony. And I would say that I was personally moved by the testimony of so many who, in a system where one primary so often defines what the result of the election is, the desire of non-registered voters to have a greater ability to participate in consequential elections, is something that I found moving. And important to note, this is a growing part of the electorate, over 1 million voters. And an electorate that is not, I think we have a stereotype of independent voter, which I don't necessarily think reflects who is choosing not to register for a party. They are younger, they are often Black or Latino. It's a group of people who feel often excluded from the current party process and want to be able to. So I found that to be compelling. I think there was a lot of, I think on the commission, I don't want to speak for my fellow commissioners, but I think many folks on the commission were similarly moved. I think the challenge fundamentally for the commission is that you can have a sense of what the problem is, but you can have different perspectives on what the solution is. There are many different flavors of open primaries, from same-day cross-registration to, and ultimately, we cannot get to consensus on what model was the right model to move forward. And I think the other element that really affected the commission's thinking is that because the commission was really conceived fundamentally to address housing questions, I think many commissioners didn't feel that they had the requisite expertise or the time to develop the requisite expertise to make such consequential recommendations for voting. So we came close to consensus, but we didn't quite get there. And one of the things that I know many commissioners share my view of is I hope that a future mayor will maintain this momentum and continue to look at these questions. Important issue, a critical issue, one that I think had a lot of, really garnered a lot of support on the commission to do something about, but ultimately, we looked at a ton of issues, and we at a certain point had to put pencils down and sort of focus where we thought we had the greatest ability to make impact, the greatest ability to get something across the board, and we wound up with a set of proposals that I'm very proud of, including the even-year elections proposal, which of course requires state constitutional action, but I think if passed, would make a tremendous difference, if not all the difference that we need to make.
Great. All right, we're going to open it up to the audience, and we'll have some microphones floating around, so just raise your hand if you have any questions for the panelists. Over here. And please introduce yourself, and then you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Nicole Campo. I am a proud alumni of the Department of City Planning. I used to help manage the ULURP process, among other agencies and jobs. But my question surrounds just the definition of affordable housing in this case, and I see that a lot of the proposals here are creating sort of a deference to affordable housing projects. Typically what that means is there's HPD subsidy, whether it's through MIH or a fully affordable development on city-owned property. But I know through experience and from family members and friends, what the city defines as affordable is in most cases, to New Yorkers struggling to find housing, not affordable. Many people do not even make enough to qualify for affordable housing, and I recognize there's a state role that's played in that process, but I guess my one critique, and I would like to understand what else is being discussed in this regard, is that we're making a lot of concessions, so to speak, to affordable housing that's still not really meeting the needs of the people who need real affordable housing.
Yeah, so I would say that we're amending the charter. And so when you're amending a constitution, you have to expect it's going to have the flexibility to work with a lot of different decisions policymakers might make in the future. And so we want to design, the last time people took a hard look at ULURP was 36 years ago. And so everything we did, we had to think, well, what if nobody changes this for another 36 years, okay? At the same time, we had to have safeguards so that communities would have a reasonable certainty that when we were creating a faster track for certain kinds of developments that they knew what they were getting, okay? So although there's a lot of complexity in the proposals, I will try to summarize it this way. If you are an affordable project that is qualifying for one of these routes, at the very least, you're delivering mandatory inclusionary housing levels of affordability. If the city council and the mayor in the future want to change how MIH works, deeper levels of affordability, more affordable, this framework works with that. So we're not stuck with the MIH we have today, but MIH, a program that requires the delivery of affordability, is locked in. Then some of our paths actually are a route only for the kinds of deeper HPD capitally subsidized projects that achieve the most profound levels of affordability, that get at things like supportive housing or get at things like housing that's affordable to people who have no income or 30% of AMI. When we talked about that BSA fast track, that's for publicly financed affordable housing. That's only for projects that are brought by what are called housing development fund companies, which are created by state law to deliver housing for low-income persons. And so I guess I would say at the start, we're delivering at least MIH. If MIH changes, it's going to work with that. And the program was built to be flexible enough to deliver the kinds of the deepest affordability that the government has to bankroll. And we're going to make it easier for the government to deliver deep affordability faster and at lower costs, because when you spend less money on process, you can spend more money on housing.
And so I couldn't agree more. I just want to reiterate one thing that Alex said, or that I also said from my remarks, is it would be a mistake to think that council amendments can fully solve the challenges of the needs for affordable housing in New York City. That's not what this is trying to do. It's trying to create a framework that remove unproductive, unhelpful, unreliable barriers that stand in the way of other policies and other actions that can meet the city's needs. These recommendations will not solve New York City's housing crisis. I do think when matched with other public action, they can make it easier to build more of the housing that New Yorkers need.
A question in the back?
Sean Coughlin from Pace University. You had mentioned that the purview originally was housing, but then you heard so much about public testimony about elections that you wandered into that a little bit as well. I wondered if from the public testimony there is anything memorable you can recall of being like, I don't know how that would work, we don't know anything about that, but that's a really cool idea. If we had infinite time and resources, would love to work on that, but that's just not happening this time.
That's a great question. After dozens of hours of testimony, I will say it is all a blur. I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I'm going to answer a different question, though, because I got the microphone. What I would say, it's not a surprise. I would say that something that I care about very deeply is the nature, well, two things that I care very deeply about that we did discuss in her testimony on. One was about nonprofit contracting. And so we heard significant testimony and came close to putting forward recommendations to try to understand how New York City's contracting rules make it difficult for the nonprofit sector that the city relies on, that all of us rely on to deliver basic services and basic needs, from arts and culture to health and housing, find it difficult to operate because of the way that New York City can make it so difficult, so ineffective, so inefficient to do business with the city. And we came close to making recommendations there, but ultimately, because of other productive actions that took place in the council over the past year, we decided that rather than muddy the waters, somewhat reluctantly, I would say personally, we decided to step back and allow current process to continue. So that was sort of one area. Another topic that was not on our agenda, but which we heard testimony on, but I would say we didn't get as far with, is understanding is police oversight. My wife, full disclosure, served twice as interim chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And I was really interested in thinking about how the charter could again strike a more effective balance in allowing the CCRB to have the resources and the power it needs to more effectively work with NYPD and citizens to make sure that our city is safe, but also that police are accountable. So I would not say that those were sort of surprised by, but they're both complicated questions, and certainly I think I'll put in the category of, with more time, with more capacity, maybe we'd have gotten further on. But I would say those are two categories of testimony that in an ideal world we would have made more progress towards.
I can give one sort of maybe oddball issue that was raised. It's not really odd, but it's difficult to wrap your head around. Some people said, you're considering open primaries, which in some ways diminish the role of traditional political parties in the process. What if you go the other way and have proportional representation with party lists as how we determine who's in the city council, right? And we used to do that. There are periods of the city's history where we did that, and certainly had a more eccentric party system. I mean, imagine, DSA would have its own members. There'd be a GOP, a Democratic Party. Maybe there'd be a Liberal Party again. The Working Families Party would have members, all in proportion to their share of votes in a citywide election for control of the city council. There is a lot to recommend that kind of system. Also, proposing a reform like that would have to wrestle with very difficult questions under the State Voting Rights Act about how such a system would ensure that communities of color still have an opportunity to elect candidates of their choosing. And so it's a very interesting reform, probably not one that's going to be on the table anytime soon, but it certainly was like a doozy to think about at the staff level.
Other questions? Right here in the front.
Thank you. Anne Marie Gray, Executive Director of Open New York, or the New York's pro-housing organization. So I've been following this very closely and launched an effort yesterday to help educate voters about it. So I'm really curious to hear you both put this in a national context a little bit more. I mean, all eyes are going to be on New York City for the election this fall. We just came out of a primary where cost of living and affordability was top line. And frankly, especially in blue cities and states, we've been doing quite a bad job of making cost of living and housing affordability actually work for people. And it's costing us national representation. So I'm really curious to hear, frankly, this is a dynamic that is playing out in a lot of other states and cities. Anything you can share about sort of reference points that you were looking at of how other cities have or haven't dealt with this, and how this sets a national model and sort of national implications of that?
That's a big and great question. I'll start. I mean, one thing I'm sort of reflecting on my brief time in city government. So as Emma said, I was a deputy mayor under Bill de Blasio, and one of the projects I had the honor to help work on was our pre-K for all expansion.
He means lead, not work on.
Believe me, a lot of take unfair credit for, because it was an incredible team of people who made that very important policy initiative happen. But what I remember in joining the de Blasio administration at that time, and again, I'm looking at Carl, who was also a very important colleague in that work and in the administration, was as important as pre-K was as both an education initiative, a child care initiative, an economic development initiative, it felt like something more because Mayor de Blasio had promised that New York City government would be able to do this big thing for people. And I remember feeling a great deal of responsibility that if we did not fulfill his ridiculous promise in building this pre-K system in 18 months, But it wouldn't be thought of as a failure of Richard Buery. It wouldn't even be thought of as a failure of pre-K or Bill de Blasio. It would be thought of as a failure of the possibilities of progressive government. It would be viewed as, of course you shouldn't elect people who have big ideas to organize government, deliver for people, because that's not what government can do. So it felt like a very big responsibility, and that's the way that I feel about developing affordable housing. Obviously, we're at a national moment where the word abundance has entered the lexicon, and it is generally reflected, and maybe not being fair, but the worst articulation is that it reflects a failure of progressive leaders to actually deliver things for people, because progressive leaders are more interested in process and rules than service delivery. And there's something to that. But I don't think at the end of the day it's a fully fair articulation, because those rules and those processes serve a purpose. Fundamentally, I believe in the vision of abundance, and I believe in the vision of making it easier to do the thing that people need. The worry that we always have, the worry that I have, is that who gets to participate in the abundance? We live in a world where the benefits of public investment often incur disproportionately to those with power, and those without power bear those burdens disproportionately. And so I really do, when I think about this work, I mean, that's sort of where I ground it. It's, can we build systems that don't elevate rules over delivery, that are really focused on delivering the thing that people need, but then nonetheless continue to embody systems that reflect the need for fairness, but make sure that development is happening in ways that are environmentally sound, to make sure that the benefits and the burdens of development, whether it's infrastructure, transportation, housing, what have you, are equally distributed, that have rules that make sure that local communities are taken seriously, but not rules that allow people to throw so many wrenches in the process that nothing ever happens. I think ultimately the national and political moment will benefit from cities like New York showing that it's possible to do both those things. The answer is not, like I hate when people say, well, you know, in China they can do that in a week. Well, yes, but I'm not sure you want the political process that allows that train to be built in a week. I think you can have a process that delivers all those things. I don't think we have to choose. I think we just have to make good judgments. And so that's the way that I would sort of center this.
Second row here.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jaydev. I work at strategy at the EDC. I am interested in what you said about who gets to participate in abundance, or in growth, or in expansion of a city. I feel like in speaking to friends, the thing that I hear most often that might put people against these questions is their fear of more housing that is glass towers, which is more than 30% increase in density. I think that's what's in people's minds as their understanding of what new housing looks like. I'm curious what testimony you heard from people who have that concern, and how you would get those people on board, because I think that's probably the biggest, well, I don't know what's the biggest group, but that is a big section of our citizenry that is skeptical of new housing because of what they're used to.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll start out, but I mean, we certainly heard those concerns, but I think as Alex has sort of described so well, those concerns are a reflection of a history built on these rules. Like, there is a reason why the development that people are afraid of is the development that happens, because the development that's possible is, the development that is reasonable, that is possible, happens when big developers are able to engage in the cost involved in a ULURP process to build big housing. There's a reason why big projects get proposed and more modest projects don't. The problem are these rules. Growth is not the enemy. The city will not thrive unless it can grow. We need growth to fund the schools that our kids need, to fund the environmental projects that will keep us healthy, to support the arts infrastructure, or one of the reasons why I'm so blessed to have been born in this city. Growth is not the enemy, but we need a process that allows communities to have the growth that they need. And so I think, I'm not I'm not a communications specialist, but I think it starts by talking through what people are actually afraid of, and then engaging neighbors and friends around the facts of these proposals. I appreciate and understand why people are afraid of development. I understand what's happening in so many neighborhoods across the city. But the problem is not growth. The problem is the system that only allows a certain kind of growth, because only that kind of growth can be sustained economically by those who have to build the housing. I think we just have to tell that story. Alec, I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, as I tried to outline earlier, I mean, I think we tried to surgically target these reforms toward the kinds of housing people most want to see. And ULURP is very good at delivering changes that people find uncomfortable. But that will remain the argument you will hear against these proposals. I think it is equally important to listen to the arguments no one in good faith is making, right? It's sometimes more telling to think about the arguments people aren't making in good faith. I am not hearing people argue that these proposals won't deliver more housing. I'm not hearing people argue that these proposals won't deliver more affordable housing. And when the whole city seems to understand that we're in desperate need of more housing and more affordable housing, well, that's a pretty telling omission.
We have time for 2 more questions. 1 more here.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Rose. I am also an alumna of the de Blasio administration, also an alumna of the Bloomberg administration, and I now serve on Manhattan Community Board 8. I was really struck by the description of how we got here, Alec, that you started with. And in 1961, we made all sorts of development illegal. So that's a zoning action. And all of these, or not all, but most of these proposals specifically deal with ULURP, which is actions for housing outside of permitted zoning. So we are addressing all sorts of issues around zoning. Why isn't the solution zoning? Why haven't we been able to achieve solutions to the problem that are zoning based? Obviously, City of Yes is an attempt to further and improve the issue on zoning. But for example, I think town center zoning, which was specifically those 4- and 5-story houses that you described as that was the affordable solution at some point along the line, wasn't that specifically excluded in the passing of City of Yes? So why can't we solve many of these issues from a zoning perspective rather than change the city charter?
Well, I think we have a profound crisis. The structures that have led us here were built up over decades. They were layered and layered and layered upon each other, and it is going to take decades to get out of it. Just like this is a generational project to rewire the system so that we have growth that is meeting people's needs. So I don't think that this charter revision process is in any way in tension with another citywide proposal like City of Yes to increase housing affordability across the city. I will say that City of Yes was our attempt at the administration when I was working in the administration at City Hall was to do as much as we could through the process we have. We proposed a text amendment that would have unlocked 106,000 units over the next 15 years. It went down to 80. There were very important changes made to get votes, necessary votes, to get that proposal along the line. And some of the most significant changes were changes that affected modest multifamily growth in some of those neighborhoods. You alluded to town center zoning. It was not carved out. There were changes. There were also changes to the transit-oriented development part of that proposal. But City of Yes was nevertheless the most significant update to the zoning code since 1961. In a fell swoop, it enabled more housing than entire mayoral administrations have. And I'm hoping that it kind of broke the dam a little bit, and that it won't be another 60 years before we see an update of the zoning code at that scale.
All right. Oh, one last question. You got it.
Hi everyone, my name is Cade Leslie, and final question, who will be charged with keeping accountability and reporting for these goals? And are there specific goals and metrics that you want to be met as an outcome of passage?
I mean, I'm not sure if I'm not sure I understand the question. I think once we, if the voters approve these changes, they then become part of the city charter, and then the city agencies who are responsible for development, from HPD to the City Planning Commission, are then accountable politically for driving their work forward. I think ultimately the accountability is driven by voters who make sure that council members, elected officials, and their appointees are continuing to move a pro-housing agenda. But I may not be fully understanding your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's right. And I'll just add, like, if there comes a political consensus in the city that we don't need to add more housing, nothing in the charter is going to, like, somehow lock us into a development path. It creates different procedures and systems of checks and balances that do allow for a pro-housing consensus to work its way out on the street and result in more housing. But it ultimately, this is a democratic city, this is a democratic process, and it's just about changing the way that the wills of majority of people will be reflected in policy.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
And so this afternoon, we'll all be closely watching. The Board of Elections will be voting.
Did the vote today?
Big vote today. Big vote today. We aim to make timely programming. Big vote today. What, if they were in the room today, what would you share with them ahead of that final vote?
Do your job, follow the law.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.